Hi, and welcome to the Charity Hub podcast, episode 7. Today I am joined by the wonderful Mark Storey. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Clinton.
How are you?
I'm wonderful,
Yes?
as you just said.
Are you sure? Right. So it's been a while since we did our podcast. The last guest was Tarek, and that was a very interesting conversation, more around business and how charities relate. So now I want to get some experience from yourself. I think that's the politest way of putting it, Mark. Just going to go through a few bit about you, a bit about the sector, and we'll see where it goes. So why don't we start off with, tell me a little bit about your childhood. Where you grew up, school?
I grew up in an East Lancashire mill town called Nelson.
Okay.
Which is not too far away from Yorkshire, and I'm here now. And school was interesting. I think I didn't particularly enjoy school, if I'm honest.
Mm-hmm.
There were certain aspects I did, others I didn't. I suppose like everybody else. Went to a school called Walton High, which was literally around the corner. There were some good parts.
Yeah, tough neighbourhood, quiet neighbourhood.
Not particularly.
Yeah.
It was an East Lancashire mill town.
Right.
So what do you expect in a town like that? Wasn't particularly tough, no.
Right. Would you say there was any early indicators back then at school about where you might want to go in a career and all the rest of it? I wanted to be the usual, a footballer and all that sort of stuff. So,
Yeah.
What were your aspirations as a young man?
Yeah, I wanted to be a mechanic.
Right, okay.
My mum and dad were both very much working class. My dad worked for Norweb, which was the electricity board,
Right.
as a high voltage cable jointer. So he used to stand in 6 inches of water in rubber wellies and join high voltage cables together. And my mum did all sorts of jobs to make ends meet.
Yeah.
But we never went without a holiday. Most of them UK holidays, but never went without one. And there's some interesting aspects to those holidays as well.
Oh, there always is, mate. There always is. Especially, I think the holidays we probably we used to back in the day. I recall one of my earliest holidays would have been Blackpool in a caravan, a very small caravan with no toilet facilities or anything like that. It was a trip across the muddy fields to get to the toilet block back in day.
Yeah, done a few of them.
Yeah.
Done a few of them.
Well, mate, they toughen us up, I think. So, what would you say? How would you round up how your family were as a whole? Were they anything particularly in your family's history that drove you to charities and all the stuff, or was it just your usual upbringing of a council estate-ish kid?
No, there wasn't anything particular in my childhood that drove me to charity. Not in my immediate family.
Yeah.
I think how I started was that my cousin needed an apnea monitor.
Yeah.
So as a baby, she'd stopped breathing. And obviously after all the tests, they decided that she had apnea and needed a monitor. And the monitor was £300. My uncle and auntie couldn't afford that. Mm-hmm. And to help at about 12, 13-year-old, I thought, well, I can do something. So I went out to try and raise some funds.
Right.
And did all sorts. Sold cream horns, baked cream horns, and sold them at school. It's amazing if you stand outside a staff room with cream horns, how many teachers will buy them.
So is this one of your little tips for any youth of today trying to do some fundraising then? Stand outside
It worked. I think I raised £3,000.
Wow, okay.
Not all on cream horns.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say that's some bacon there.
There were other things as well. But that sort of started the move, I think, into that type of work. Obviously, we managed to buy a monitor. We also managed to give around £2,700 to the local special care baby unit.
Wowzers. I mean, what year we're talking here?
I'm going to give me age.
I'm not trying to give your age away.
This is about 1982.
Right, okay. A lot of money. A lot of money. Even nowadays, a lot of money. So would you say, was there anybody back then, either a family member or sort of a mentor who sort of inspired your early career choices?
Yeah, remember my early career choices were as a mechanic.
Yeah.
So, there was nobody back then who inspired that. I suppose apart from my dad, who was
Already
a
involved.
grafter,
Yeah.
and not in that industry, but certainly and I sort of go back to the holidays.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I wanted to be a mechanic was if you've seen your dad chasing a wheel down the central reservation after it's come off your car, you think, maybe I don't want to experience that.
Yeah.
You're going on a holiday and suddenly the gear lever comes off in his hand. You think there's something.
Well, at least you got somebody that could maybe fix it, or at least
yeah,
know what they're doing.
And so that inspired me to be a mechanic, I think.
Right.
That journey didn't quite go as it should. But other than, obviously doing the fundraising for my cousin, part of that journey, and I suppose part of the inspiration, came from a meeting that I had with the marketing director of Buoyant. And I don't know whether you know Buoyant.
I've heard of it.
So it's part of the Silent Night Group.
Right, okay.
And they manufactured sweets, essentially. And their centre was in Nelson, and literally around the corner from where I lived. So this one particular day I went in there and I asked to speak to the marketing director. I must have been about 13. And the receptionist said, "Who are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm just trying to raise some money, And she went, "Well, he doesn't really speak to people who just come off the street."
Yeah.
She says, "But wait here and I'll see what I can do." So I waited and waited and waited.
Like you do.
I waited about an hour and a half, I think. And then this fella came out and said, "Who are you? What do you want?" So I told him. And again, he reiterated that he didn't usually see people who just walked in.
Mm-hmm.
But he invited me into his office. And I told him why I was doing it, what I was doing. And then he took me into a room. This sounds...
I'm going to say.
This sounds a bit
this has got a good ending, stay tuned.
And he said, "Everything in here you can have."
Wow.
And there was 3-piece suites. They were all brand new. There were mirrors, there were pictures, there were tables, table lamps, you name it, it were there.
Yeah.
And then he said, "If you go and see my mate Twiggy," I thought there's some sort of singer here, down at our other factory. He says, "See what he can do." So I went down to this other factory and he said, "Oh yeah, Derek's just rung me and told me about you.
Right.
I've got 3 bed settees here for you." So as a 13-year-old,
wow.
knowing what to do with all this furniture, so I then had to find an auctioneer.
Okay.
And sort of hold it at a big auction. However, Derek also rang me the following day and said, "I've got some clowns for you," which is a bit random.
Yeah, a little bit.
And when I went and collected them, he said, "Oh, my wife makes them."
All right, okay.
He says,
I wonder where that was going.
Yeah. So these stuffed clowns, my wife makes them, and they're Harrods clowns.
Oh, right. Nice
so
and cheap then, yeah.
Suddenly I had 10 clowns which were destined for Harrods with all the labels on, and they were donated as well. So it was a good time, I think. There were a lot of people came together. We ended up with, I think it was something like 100 dozen eggs from an egg farm that we started selling. But it was all good
how
how businesses came together and actually just supported us. That said, I did also get arrested.
Okay.
I was walking round Blackburn, and I used to go into the hospital and just walk into the chief exec's office.
That you do.
Yeah, and get offered a glass of milk. So, when I went in this day, they'd given me a letter to say, Mark Storey's collecting for Burnley General Hospital. And we authorised this. So I'd gone into, I think it was Blackburn or somewhere like that, Great Harwood. And I was collecting things from shops. So I'd just go into shops and ask them. And this shop gave me a full tub of chocolate raisins.
Right.
Which obviously we were going to sort of split into 2-ounce bags.
Right.
And sell. We'd been to cash and carries. Cash and carries would give us loads. And,
Brilliant.
So they give me this jar. And I had lots of other things besides. I were laden down with bags.
Right.
And suddenly these blues and twos came by. And the police officer got out and asked me what I was doing. And I said, I'm collecting for charity. And he didn't believe me.
Okay.
And arrested me.
Nice.
So there's me.
Positive community touch there.
Yeah, there's me sat in the back of this police car, crying my eyes out, wondering what was going to happen. And I'm saying to him, but I've got a letter, So he looked at it and then de-arrested me.
Okay.
And said, well, in future, if you're coming into, Great Harwood, then you need to be letting us know. So call into the police station.
Oh, gosh.
But when I was collecting in Burnley and Nelson, I had a good relationship with police there anyway, because it's in the days of community bobbies, and everybody knew everybody. Yeah. So I didn't have a problem, and I was supported by them, to be honest. But then you move into another town and end up being arrested.
It was a young scally.
Yeah. So that was all fun. But I think going back to your original question, which was about the inspiration, I think a lot of it was to do with Derek.
Yeah.
And for the life of me, I can't remember his last name.
Yeah.
But if he's listening to this, and I don't know,
I'm gonna say,
put a big shout out to him.
Yeah. Well, obviously I had that influence, and I think sort of touches on a bit of an important part there, because having been in the charity world, both of us, quite a while, it's very difficult to raise funds and find different ways to raise funds, and I think sometimes going back to how it used to be, like that, going and, can you donate me some sweets? Can you donate me some folders? And someone giving you a sofa or a settee bed, or giving us items that enables us to go and raise those funds. And I think we still need to get back to that a little bit, because it's one of the angles I've started to approach recently, is just going and asking for the materials, rather, because a lot of businesses are hard up. It's very, very tough times, I think, at the moment. And I think if we can just start using our brains a little bit again, and starting to encourage maybe the younger generation to have a look at how we do it, because not everybody's here just to give money out all the time. We do have to put that hard work in. So I think that would be something for the businesses to maybe think about as well. And if we do get any younger listeners or viewers, then have a think about how you're going to go and raise those funds. Go and speak to people like you've just done there, because you might get turned down 20 times, but you might just get that one person that opens the door for you. And I think also it'd be nice for those businesses to do that, because then that's giving some encouragement to the younger generation to persist in what they're doing in helping.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Clinton. It's about relationships at the end of the day, and fundraising is about relationships.
Definitely.
So if you've got somebody buying into your vision, your mission, then whatever way they support you is...
Yeah, because it's not always materials and stuff, is it? Sometimes it's just advice.
That's right.
That were one of the biggest... I was obviously a lot older, but when I got into the sector, the biggest thing that I got from it was visiting people like Lindsay James, Vicky Beavers, Tarek Shah, to go for advice, have conversations to try and understand the sector and understand different approaches. Obviously, one of the things we're trying to do at the Charity Hub around the networking and stuff is this peer-to-peer support, because we know it's a very tough time, not just for businesses, but for charities and all alike, I think, at the moment. And I think that peer-to-peer support is vitally important. And maybe just sometimes getting back to grassroots. I think things get a little bit complicated. I'm not a big advocate of people rattling tubs. I don't think it's a good approach, and I think it's a very old way of doing things. Yeah. But at the same time, can also create that engagement. So I used to prefer to do it without the tubs on show, so I could just have a open conversation with somebody about what we were doing, and then if they wanted to make a donation, then I would say, oh yeah, we have a tub here, or etc. So now we're talking and we're getting on to the sector. Tell me about what was your first job in the sector. You know, how did you get into it? How did all that work?
Yeah, it's not as clear cut, I suppose, because I did all the volunteering stuff, and if we stick with that for a moment, because I think volunteering plays a massive part and gives you skills and develops skills in you that you wouldn't ordinarily get if you go into, the world of work.
Yeah.
So, for example, I wanted to be a mechanic, and I did everything possible to be a mechanic. Mm-hmm. Now, that wouldn't have taught me fundraising. No. That would have taught me nothing about this sector. And it was by luck. I say this now, but I was working. I'd gone through college. I'd taken that route. I'd got my motor vehicle craft studies. I then went to Bolton and got my motor vehicle technician certificates. Mm-hmm. I'd got an Institute of Motor Industry diploma in management, all sorts, and I got working for a garage that during the recession burnt down.
Oh, right, okay.
So I lost everything. I lost all my tools. Everything was gone.
Right.
And it was a case of, well, I need to go into something else now. Mm-hmm. What do I know? And I knew community work.
Yep.
Because obviously although I wasn't qualified, I'd done all the fundraising, but the fundraising was linked to community work. Yeah. I'd raised funds with East Lancashire Scanner Appeal to get the first CT scanner in East Lancashire. I was still only a kid then.
Yeah.
And these were all skills, transferable skills that I'd built up.
Yep, that's the important part, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. But I built them up through volunteering, not through the world of work. Yeah. So when I came to sort of moving into a different job, into a different sector, it was the public sector.
Yeah.
And I worked as a community worker on one of the roughest council estate in Pendle.
Right, okay.
And, it was good. It was good. And we introduced all sorts of initiatives on that estate.
Yeah.
And I made it a success. But as part of that role, I had to write funding bids.
Nice.
So whilst I'd done all the community fundraising previously as a volunteer, suddenly I'm in the world of work and writing funding bids.
Yeah.
Which sort of give me a different skill set. And I suppose that's where I've developed and gone through my career.
Yeah.
I left there and ended up continuing to work in local authorities. So that was Pendle Council. I went for another job in Pendle Council as an community economic development worker.
Right, okay. Another fancy title.
Yeah, so that was all your ERDF and ESF funding.
Right.
And obviously continued with the bid writing aspect of that. Then went into Burnley Council as Priority 4 Programme Manager.
Okay.
Which was, again, ERDF and ESF funding. But rather than looking at writing the bids, I was poacher turned gamekeeper.
Right, okay.
Because I was then looking at assessing the bids, managing them, and we had 52 ERDF and ESF projects that I had to manage.
Right.
And all the action plans. So I was writing the community action plans to get the money from the European Commission in the first place.
Yeah.
And that was an interesting time because it gave me a different string.
Yeah.
And I was assessing bids with Government Office for the North West.
Right.
And it was at that level, so you were looking at, you could tell when a good bid came through.
Yeah,
You
I'm
knew
going
the
to say, I
difference
bet you
between a
can
good one and a
take,
bad
I
one.
bet you can tell the difference between those who are just trying to figure it out and work it out to, like, full-blown professionals who do it as a full-time job.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you could see those that have been written by professionals.
Yeah.
And it was obvious.
Right.
So,
okay.
You wanted to look at the bids that were coming through which were of substance,
Yep.
but not necessarily which had been written by a paid
Yeah.
person who was just coming in to write a bid for somebody.
Yeah.
So you wanted to work with them at that level and really get the community on board with their own bid, I think. That was interesting, and there were a few issues with some of the projects, including, I used to have to go and assess them,
Mm-hmm.
and as part of that assessment, it was a mini audit.
Right. Okay.
So, can you tell me where you've put down that you've bought a TV? What's that for? Well, it's for training. Can you show me where that TV is?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's here. Well, that's a Samsung, and the one you've got and paid for is a Toshiba. So where's this Toshiba?
Yeah.
Oh, that's at my house. So why is the Toshiba at your house? And then and there was a rule that you couldn't buy second-hand equipment.
Right. Okay.
And there was a piece in the receipts for toys. Oh, can you show me where these toys are?
Yeah.
What they for? And this was a project that had to provide sort of childcare for people to get back into work. Right. So it was being, well supported.
Yeah.
So where's these toys? Oh, well, they're there. That's not what this says. Mm-hmm. So, the pieces of paper didn't match up with what was in. And oh, well, we bought them second hand. Well, the rules around buying second hand. You can't buy second hand without a good reason. Yeah. That was just one of the things. So that sounds a little bit petty in terms of the second hand toys. There were other things, like the TV, which had been bought for somebody's house rather than... Yeah. And there was a lot of misuse of funds there, so we had to be quite strict on it. And, and actually, if that was happening, then you needed to come down on
absolutely, because you've got to imagine how much time some people either spend putting those bids in or waiting for that money, or what that money will actually do, and I think again it over the years with there's been some big stories in the news, especially some of the bigger charities down London and stuff, where they have taken a lot of money and it's gone missing, or has not gone to do things that it should do, which puts us under quite a big spotlight. But I think it's an important spotlight for us to be under as well. We have to make sure we're whiter than white. At the end of the day, I'd like to think at least 99.9% of people in this sector are here for the actual good of the sector and the people we're serving. But I think it also means we also have to keep that close eye on things, because unfortunately there are people that will exploit these situations. And I think as much as it's been amazing bringing CICs into the equation to enable us to get set up quicker and probably function a little bit easier than a proper organised charity or a CIO, I think we need to make sure we have that oversight all the time. And I know a lot of us are probably responsible for ourselves and each other, but I think keeping that clarity for the public as well, that their money's being spent properly, is very, very important to keep that connection. On that side of things then, so do you feel we've made any progression on that side of things in the years that you've come into this sector and to where you are now? Do you think we've gone backwards? Do you think there's different ways we can look at how we do this?
No, I think you've always got to have checks and balances, without a shadow of a doubt. And as a leader of a charity, you've got to make sure those checks and balances are in place, and you've got to drive from the front. To make sure that actually things like our auditing at the time don't happen.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to pick up on that again before I come full circle to your question, which is after I'd left Burnley, I sort of went overseas to work for a bit. And when I came back, I moved to Doncaster.
Right.
And ended up working for a development trust in Sheffield.
Okay.
Which gave me the insight again. And it was completely different because I'd gone from gamekeeper back to poacher.
Right. Okay.
So I was developing projects like the Lifestyle Centre in Bayton and various other projects, which again got me back into writing bids, but writing bids in a different style.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all about the ERDF funding. So it was I think it was Objective 1 money at the time.
Right.
And there was a lot of money, but the people who were responsible for managing that fund as well were, how can I put this? They knew what they wanted.
Right.
And, if you tried pulling the wool over their eyes in any way, shape or form, then they would have found that out.
Yeah.
So, when we put business cases together, when we put business plans together, we were questioned on them before any funds were released.
Right.
So your stats were checked, everything was so that had come a long way since the few years before when I was involved, and it was it was great to see that development, that new approach. I think times and again I was responsible for bid writing, so that's always been my forte.
Right. Okay.
But I've made mistakes with that as well. And we used to, when I was with government office and assessing their bids, literally you would have a template to place over
right. Okay.
the
application.
The answer.
Yeah.
And that template meant that you could only read those words.
Right. Okay.
So if it called for 500 words in Arial size 10,
right,
then that's what you used.
Okay.
If you used Arial size 12, that bid would be dismissed.
Wow. Okay.
Because the template didn't apply.
Right. Yeah.
And I remember a few years later when I was working for Accent Group, I wrote 2 bids which were essentially the same but for different areas, and we won one, which was £500,000, and the second one got kicked out, and I couldn't understand why. And it's because I'm a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to things looking right, and the text had wrapped over and left a blank page.
Right.
So I moved the margins. It was exactly the same text. I'd moved the margins so that it then appeared to look right.
Yeah.
And when the assessors assessed it, they threw it out because I'd altered the form. A £500,000 mistake.
Oh,
wow. I didn't lose my job.
No.
Which was great. But it's things like that. And I still to this day say to people when they're writing bids, stick with the instructions. Look at what font size it is. Look at how many words. Don't go above that word count. And although there's less of that going on these days in terms of, if you're a few words over, it doesn't matter. For some people, for some organisations, I still advocate stick to the
the guidelines are there for a reason.
They are. So don't deviate from them, because
I think more so, especially now, because there's not just people looking at these application forms as software and computer systems. So they're not going to take into the fact that might be a personal error or something on there. So just try and stick to those guidelines if you can.
Can we come back to what the question was, because I don't think I answered it fully?
What were your first steps, as into getting into it, and then was there a defining moment that sort of made you commit into that charity work or the world?
Yeah, I think obviously all the skill set I'd built up as a bid writer meant something.
Yeah.
And going from the Development Trust, I suppose, was the first foray into bid writing for a charity rather than a public sector.
Right, okay.
And that was sort of 2003-ish. Yeah. And I enjoyed it. I even enjoyed bid writing, and it's not everybody's cup of tea.
No.
I liked it. And then sort of moving into the housing sector, and it wasn't a registered charity, it was a registered provider of social housing.
Right.
So not for profit.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't always worked in charities, I've worked in not for profits.
Yeah.
And doing the bid writing for Accent Group or Accent Regeneration and Community Partnerships, which was the training arm, meant that I could get money in to make a difference to the lives of young people,
mm-hmm.
which was great.
Yeah.
And there were 4 training centres that I was responsible for. Moving into a different area when the training centres closed, and they closed down the Regeneration and Community Partnerships arm,
mm-hmm.
It didn't really do it for me.
Right.
And I wanted something else, so I ended up with Air Rescue 24, which was a medical rescue charity.
Right.
However, the trustees wanted a helicopter within 6 months. And the cost of a helicopter.
I was going to say, if there's a Matchbox one, there might be a chance.
Yeah, I said you ain't got it.
Yeah, wrong person then.
Yeah. So they ended up closing the charity because they couldn't get a helicopter within 6 months.
Wowzers.
And then I went to another local authority.
Yeah.
Local to here, but not Doncaster.
Right.
And I didn't really enjoy it.
Right. Okay.
If I can be honest.
Yeah.
And the job came up at S&4Cs.
Okay.
And I looked at the person spec and thought, I can do that. And I nearly didn't apply.
Right.
Because the title of the organisation was Sheffield Churches Council for Community Care.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm going to have to be a committed Christian, and there's going to be preconditions, and there wasn't any.
Right.
So I thought, I'll give that a go, and got the job. But I couldn't. I'd only been at the latest local authority for 3 months,
right.
and
enough.
I couldn't start. It was enough, and I couldn't start at S&4Cs for another 3 months because they didn't want me to. They wanted the former director to see a project through to completion before I then came in.
Okay.
So I sat at the other place just twiddling my thumbs and thinking, well, what? And I hadn't handed me notice in because I didn't want to be without a job.
Yeah.
But I wasn't being given enough work that really meant anything.
Challenges, yeah.
Yeah, well, to be fair, I wasn't really being given any work.
Right, okay.
So it wasn't a great experience.
So what were it that actually attracted you to that role at SM4Cs then to apply for it?
A challenge.
Right.
I think. I didn't know much about the organisation, if I'm honest. But when I went for the interview and found out a little bit more about the organisation, I thought, I can do this, and there's plenty I can do.
Yeah. So what would you say were your biggest challenges that you faced when you first started there, apart from obviously the obvious of learning the job and being in the sector? What other things sort of stand out for you at that time?
I didn't really need to learn the sector, I don't think, because I understood the sector.
Yeah.
I needed to learn who the contacts were. I needed to learn more about the organisation. My first 90 days were really spent learning.
Yeah.
Finding out about the staff, what drove them as well. And at the time, I think there were 8 staff members, including me.
Right.
And the other challenges were the finances.
Always.
They were okay. And also there were no strategic plan.
Right.
And this organisation had been going for just shy of 50 years.
Right. Okay.
So no strategic plan, and there was a lot to do.
Yeah. Well, you said yourself around the name itself, it had diverted. If you can, you just touch briefly on what it is SM4Cs does, is doing, and is hoping to do for the future.
So SM4Cs obviously stands for Sheffield Churches Council for Community Care. Since 2017, at least, we've been known as SM4Cs, and that is theoretically the brand.
Yeah.
We provide a helping hand to older people when they need it most. So since 1965, we have delivered the Good Neighbour scheme,
Okay.
which is about preventing loneliness and isolation amongst older people.
Right.
And its reality is loneliness.
Yep.
And, you can be lonely without being isolated as well. But people think, oh, well, it's somebody with no family members. Not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily. We've got a service user who stands at a kitchen window every morning and watches as her son walks by. And she waves at him out of the window. And he waves back. And that's it.
That's the interaction.
No social contact with her own son.
Wow.
Other than that. So, it can be families, and that
Yeah.
doesn't appear to be a fractious family.
Yeah.
It's just
How they are.
how they are, but
Yeah.
she's lonely.
Yeah.
There's others that similar situations, and it's horrible because I think the stats, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but it's something like 3.5 million people aged 65 or over say that TV is their own main form of company.
Which is sad in its own right, isn't it?
It is. And I did a talk yesterday. I went to a fundraising event by Kathy Markwick and Janet Thornton, who were two brilliant people, by the way. And I got up to speak. And after I spoke, and this was to a group of older people as well who were going for a friendship lunch.
Yeah.
But somebody came out and said, "Do you do this in Rotherham?" And I said, "No, we're just Sheffield and now Doncaster." And she started crying and said, "I wish you were in my area because actually I've got dementia and I'm 81 next week and I've nobody. And I come to this event, she goes to not that one, but she goes to some of the friendship lunches, but so there's no support for her. And she's struggling, and it breaks your heart, when you think, actually, could we do that? Could we?
Could we gain that?
If we had the funding, of course we could.
Yeah.
Of course we could. But actually, we'd be utilising volunteers, but you need somebody to manage those volunteers or manage the logistics, and it's not a cheap option.
No.
But we could be doing something. We could be doing a lot more, and we do work with other organisations. So the question is, well, is there another organisation that could do that in Rotherham?
Okay.
But then,
have you found them?
Well, a lot of organisations that do the befriending, won't do befriending for people with dementia.
Right. Okay.
So suddenly you're in this catch-22. Oh yeah, we'll go and befriend, but you've got dementia. Sorry, no.
So the isolated become even more isolated.
Yeah, and I think it's something like, and again, forgive me if the stats are wrong, but 30% of people with dementia lost friends after the diagnosis.
Wow.
And that happened to my mum because a cousin used to go and visit her, and friends used to call and see her. And then suddenly she got this diagnosis of dementia, and it was as though a switch was kicked in, and actually people stopped visiting her.
Yeah.
So then it increases the loneliness significantly, and it's horrible.
I can only reflect that to the similarities of when I was at Eve's Trust, when people get the cancer diagnosis and people either stop or drift away, and what we found out around that was a lot of it is just because people just didn't actually know what to say. And we used to say, well, you don't say any different than you normally would say, because you're treating them differently just because they've got an illness, and that's not what they want. They just want to be that same person. So do you feel Well, Rotherham has obviously been mentioned. What about South Yorkshire as a whole? Do you feel you still got expansion and a lot of potential work to do there? Is there people in those areas that are already doing it that you maybe need to collab with? Or do you genuinely think that it is a service that's just needed in that area now?
Sorry, I didn't fully answer your previous question, which was about what we do. Okay, so I touched on the befriending stuff.
Yeah.
We also do hospital to home services, so we will deliver community equipment that's on loan.
Yep.
We'll help people out of hospital, so
Right.
they're not staying in hospital longer where actually they're deteriorating.
As in you'll transport them home?
We do transport them in Sheffield.
Yeah.
So we do transport, we do fitting of equipment,
Right.
and we also do a back home scheme, which is where we provide a 4-week package of support.
Right.
And that's not personal care. That's more helping them to reintegrate into the community, helping them get back on the feet. So it's a strengths-based approach.
Yep.
What can you do rather than what can't you do?
Yeah.
So we do that. That started with us in Doncaster 3 years ago.
Okay.
And then we moved it across to Sheffield because we went, wow, this is massive.
Yep.
So those are some of the things we do. We during COVID, we started a pen pal scheme.
Right, brilliant.
And we've now seen well over 10,000 pieces of mail.
That's amazing.
Which we deal with.
Wow.
Okay. We started telephone support during COVID because our face-to-face stuff was paused.
Yeah.
The hospital discharge stuff carried on. So it's the complexity of what we do and the integration of all the different parts that makes us what we are.
Yeah.
So we can cross-refer into all our different services. So you only go into one place.
Yeah.
And then suddenly
ideal.
you've got, so we take somebody home, we notice that actually there's nobody there. They can be referred straight into our befriending.
Yeah.
We're probably one of the only organisations in South Yorkshire. And again, if I'm wrong, I'm happy to be slapped down.
Don't worry, you will be.
But we're one of the only organisations in South Yorkshire that actually offers the befriending service for people with dementia.
Right, okay.
And our staff and volunteers are trained to Dementia Stars level.
Right.
And it's gold level, which is completely different to Dementia Friends.
Brilliant.
It's more...
It's been done properly.
Yeah,
which
it
is nice.
It is.
What would you say either your ambitions or the organisation's ambitions for the next, 2 to 5 years or even longer?
Yeah. We're more than happy to collaborate. If there's somebody doing a job in a geographic area, then great.
Yeah.
And we can refer to them.
Yeah.
And they can refer to us for things in our area.
Yeah.
More than happy to work like that. If there's a gap in the market and we're best placed to plug that gap, then we should be doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We should be doing it. The services that are missing, and we know they're missing, and something needs to be done.
Right.
Now, I'm sure there's conversations need to be had with commissioners. There's conversations need to be had with funders.
Yep.
And they do need to take place, but we can say, well, actually, until you've embedded yourself in an area, well, we're 60 years old in Sheffield. We've been working in the hospital since 1977.
Yeah, it's not a bad history.
I think we're pretty well embedded.
Yeah.
Now, how do we do that in other areas? Do we need to do that in other areas? If we do, then let's do it.
From personal experience, I would say it's absolutely needed. Having had a home care business a few years back, and especially around the isolation, the one you mentioned there about the sun walking past, I remember we used to have a family that at Christmas they used to take around a tinned Christmas dinner and then just leave them on their own after visiting them for 20 minutes in the morning on Christmas Day. And that absolutely blew my mind, that's even how things operate. And that person's getting a visitor, but they're getting a visitor to drop off a canned food and then left on their own, isolated. And the work that you guys are obviously already doing, and I hope you can expand and grow more, because it's very much needed. With an ageing population, it's obviously going to become more and more in demand. And I think the way we're becoming isolated in the world around tech and everything else. We're not having those family visits anymore like we used to do. So, from my personal opinion, please carry on what you're doing.
Thank you.
Please keep pushing what you're doing and pushing to other areas, because I just think the approach and the attitude you take to it is the right way. And again, especially with the bigger problems that are growing in society around dementia.
Yeah.
And I think, having to work closely with the authorities would be great. So if there is anybody listening to this podcast, anyone, please reach out. Please speak to Mark S&4Cs. Come through us at the Charity Hub. Have those conversations, even if you just want to find out what they're doing.
Something that struck me when I joined S&4Cs was that we were facilitating the delivery of a hospital bed in a lot of cases, which we still do.
Yeah.
However, we noticed that bedding isn't given with a hospital bed.
Right. Okay.
And it's a single bed.
Yeah.
And you can't get a fitted sheet. It needs to be a flat sheet because a fitted sheet won't go on. Now, if you've been a couple that have been living together, and older people, you've been living together for, 50 years or whatever, generally speaking, you've probably got a double bed.
Yep.
So, and if you're in poverty, how the heck do you...
Because, again, not something that's cheap.
Do you get all the bedding?
Yeah.
So we did a call out for good quality second-hand bedding.
Okay.
And we worked with the hospital, the laundry, and we sent it all there. They laundered it all and folded it, and then we had to sort of sort it. And then we started looking at new stuff, and we did Amazon campaigns, to get bedding, single bedding, quilts, pillows. And every time we go out, if we're facilitating a hospital bed, the delivery of a hospital bed, then we take the bedding out.
Okay, brilliant.
And we make that bed up so it's ready for the patient.
Yeah.
And I hate using that term patient.
No, but yeah.
Ready for them when they come home.
Yeah.
We also, when we take people home from hospital, we take them out a food parcel.
Wow.
Because the number of times that we've been there and turned up when actually we've emptied the fridge.
Yeah.
And the milk is green.
Off. Yeah,
the bread is mouldy and falling apart, and the bacon's black.
Yeah.
So we take a food parcel out, and it's only a basic food parcel.
Right.
But it gets them over those first few days until carers or somebody else can go in and make a difference and start, embedding something.
So there's collaborations there alone, isn't there? Obviously, just shooting off the top of my head, obviously work closely with people like Vicky at the Sleep Charity and stuff, which is obviously all connected. There's unfortunately way too many food banks. But I just think those areas for people to reach out and come and connect with you as well. Because that's, for me, is where the collaboration can work perfectly, because you're already in a position looking after these members who are isolated and maybe haven't got the food or the bedding or whatever it can be. You're already interacting with those. Then it makes sense for people to work with you to be able to help deliver that. Are there any new initiatives or partnerships on the horizon for S&4Cs that we can hear about?
Yeah, obviously it's our 60th anniversary this year.
Right.
So
big marker.
Yeah, so we will be looking at the branding.
Right, okay.
I think everybody looks at our logo and says SCCCC, and often they add another C on or take the C off. And when they talk about it as it's SCCCC.
Yeah.
With S&4Cs.
Yeah.
So there'll be something coming out. Don't know quite what yet.
Yep.
Something.
Okay.
And obviously we're having a gala dinner, which will be the first gala dinner ever in our history.
Wowzers.
So we don't know what we're doing with that.
That'll be interesting then.
But yeah, it'll be fun times. And as I said earlier, we're always looking at services. So I can't say no, we'll be delivering that service we'll be developing that service, because right now I don't know.
It's all fun.
And everything's emergent, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, when we're looking at strategy, we're looking at emergent strategy and thinking, right, okay, well, we do this. Is there an extension? And if you're looking at your 2x2 grids, and I think it's the Ansoff matrix, it's new products, existing customers. What is it that's missing that we can move into another area
Right.
that's needed, or what is it that we've got a customer already, but what is it they need?
Yeah.
And there's, I suppose that's a fact-finding mission. It's a bit of collaboration in terms of what is causing you pain points. Because actually, unless we're taking away your pain points, there's no point in us existing.
Right.
And we do review that. Trustees review that all the time. Are we still valid? Is there still a need for us? And if we
Well,
can,
I can
look
definitely
back
answer
over
that one
60
for you,
years,
mate.
yeah.
But it's a definitely yes there. Just knowing the sector as a whole, knowing how things just are in general in life right now, and like we say, we've already mentioned like the aging population and all the rest of it, and isolation is becoming a bigger issue. So, yeah, I mean, please keep doing what you're doing, and I hope we can continue to support you and help spread the word and try and create those connections for those collaborations, because they are very important. And I think the collaborations for all of us are the way we're going to stay stronger and grow.
Yeah.
So sort of they tie in quite nicely together to my next question, which would be around challenges within the sector. And, what would you say are your biggest struggles, apart from probably the financials like most of us? What are your other biggest struggles?
I can't disagree with you on funding, because funding is always a problem. We're okay. We've got some decent reserves, but not over the top reserves.
Yeah.
So they will cover us if the worst were to happen. So that funding is probably the one thing that keeps me up at night.
What would you say would make life a little bit easier for you when it comes round to funding?
I suppose in a way, we're not as well known as a lot of other charities. So what's the public perception of us? I don't know, because I don't think the public really know about us.
Yeah.
We're 60 years old, and maybe our message isn't strong enough, although Erica, who you obviously know, who does our marketing and comms, she's very good.
Yeah.
And we're out there on social media all the time. We're pushing ourselves to make people aware of us, but unless you need us, you don't know about us.
Yeah.
And then it's that secrecy, isn't it? We were once known as Sheffield's best kept secret, and that's something I want.
Not something you don't want.
No, exactly. When I took over the role, it was like, proud to say we're Sheffield's best kept secret. I'm like, no, we need to change that. We really do need to change that. So funding is perhaps an issue. I don't know what we can do, other than it's changing the way you view it.
Yeah.
So, whilst everybody is, I mean, there's that pyramid, isn't there, where you start at, getting individual funders in, and then actually you move towards social enterprise stuff.
Yeah.
And really, it's identifying that. And what is it? I'd like to be in a position where actually we develop something, some sort of social enterprise, which gives all its money back to the charity. So any surplus generated is given to the charity, and that then becomes the sustainability loop.
Yep.
So actually, you're not having to rely on going, to funders and writing bids and asking people for money, because if you're generating it yourself to put back in, then actually that frees up the funds for other charities who are needed.
Absolutely.
And it becomes less competitive. And let's not beat about the bush. In the private sector, they talk about competition. In the charity sector, we tend not to talk about competition, but there's competition everywhere.
Yeah, very much so. And again, very much so since the introduction of CICs as well, because there's more people trying to do good for probably now smaller pots of money. I mean, I don't know about you, but from my personal point of view, we need to have better conversations and understanding from these people that are providing the grants, whether that be local authority, government, businesses. Because just to highlight one, recently there was obviously some funding left available coming towards the end of the year. That went out last week, I think it was, and that had to be in within 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
And it's like, we are all in this sector, most of us are already under so much strain and pressure, especially time-wise. So I already know, just off of that one thing there, I already know 5 people that I spoke to that were up late through the week to get that done. That's unpaid hours, unsociable hours, more stress. And this is one of my biggest issues, because sometimes, to be fair, it's not a bad pot of money that's available, but sometimes it might be £500, £1,000, and not to sound ungrateful or anything like that, that's a lot of work for very little money. And one of the other approaches I would love to see, not only from the businesses but from the sector, from government and everybody else, is a longer term plan. We cannot fix things in 12 months.
No.
We can band-aid things. We can start to look at things. If we could start looking and talking about potential projects being funded for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we can actually start having a strategy and actually being able to implement that, and we can actually put some proper focus and attention onto what's needed. So that is my opinion. I don't know where you stand with that.
Yeah, you need the 5-year investment, don't you, really?
Ideally, that'd be lovely.
Yeah, but it's so difficult because central government funds are, hit and miss anyway. But a true investment in the work of an organisation is the way forward. It really is.
Yeah.
There's a lot of difficulties in achieving that, I think. And you mentioned about people being up late. Many a night I've been up at 4 o'clock, writing or finalising a bid, before I got a couple of hours sleep, before I then went into work to finish that bid off.
Yeah.
And one of his latest bids that we submitted, we took a chance. We took an absolute massive chance. And it only came to our desks 3 days before the deadline.
Right.
Yeah, we couldn't ask any clarification questions because that deadline had passed.
Yeah.
And we thought, well, what's the worst that can happen? We spend a few hours and
we get another no.
And we get a no. And we wrote the bid.
Yeah.
And it was submitted on time, and we scored 97.8%.
Wowzers.
So
without the support and guideline.
And that wasn't me just writing it. It was myself and my senior leadership team who came together, and we said, right, okay, you take that section, you take that section. And then one person, after it had all been written, pulled it all together.
Right.
And it looked like one person had written it.
Brilliant.
So, it wasn't as though 4 people had written different sections.
Yeah.
It was just so
seamlessly, and
it was brilliant.
Yeah.
How it was structured, it was brilliant. So
and I think again, you sometimes have to take that chance. Yeah. Because I think I've done it myself. Sometimes you'll look at some of those funding things that come and you go, I forgot either the time, or that's a lot of work I'm gonna have to put in to potentially even just get thrown out. That might take a day to write. And I think sometimes we have to take that gamble, because I think a lot of other charities are thinking the same thing and probably don't go for it. And probably I'm not going to say the easier ones, because there aren't really any easy ones, but maybe some that are a bit more straightforward. And then they'll tend to focus on those. Do you think we continue down the same path to keep us sustainable, or do you think we are just building up bigger problems if we continue this short-sighted approach to funding and sustainability? What I think we need to try and figure out is, from the likes of me, you, and those who've been in our sector for a few years and got a bit of experience now, is how do we make this funding more sustainable long term? Because I think from our point of view at the charity, one of the things we're trying to do is push it down education. We're trying to educate the CICs and the charities to not be reliant on funding, because we can't be. We have to have what they would class as a saleable product, and it's something that you can go to businesses to use. So for me, that's how I think we could become sustainable. I just don't know what your thoughts are around that, if you've got any ideas yourself.
Yeah, certainly. I think, first of all, I mentioned social enterprises, and there needs to be something. First of all, just going back one, we always look at full cost recovery.
Right.
So, part of my time has to go into every bid.
Yep.
Because I've got to be paid somehow.
Yep.
And how much of that time, a lot of people will go, well, let's put 20% in.
Yeah.
That's not realistic. And I wrote a spreadsheet, which if anybody wants it, I'm happy to share it. And that allocates all the central costs and the amount of office space they take up, as per head count.
Yeah.
And works out a real figure.
Right, okay.
So, and then it adds everything up, so you get the total cost of your project.
Yeah.
Now, if a funder comes and says, well, we're not going to cover core costs, that's difficult. But actually, you're not saying they're covering core costs, you're saying they're covering an apportionment of management time, or an apportionment of, admin time, which is relevant for that particular project. But also, you're looking, so we start to build up, that all project cost and what it costs over the lifetime and getting that back.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're not dibbing into your reserves to pay your chief exec or your admin officer or your volunteer coordinator. Yeah. But also the social enterprise aspect, where you're actually developing something which can create a surplus, and that has got to be run in a business-like way. Absolutely. As charities should be.
Absolutely, yes.
But it's got to be run in a business-like way to create that surplus to put back into the organisation for that longevity, that sustainability.
Yeah.
And perhaps engaging with the wider community to your case for support's got to be right.
Yeah.
Why are you needed? What are you delivering? What's the message you're trying to convey?
Obviously, you've got your role at SM4Cs. Obviously, well, not obviously, from I already know this, but you also have the role as a deputy lieutenant for South Yorkshire. Do you want to just touch on what that means and the responsibilities of that, for anybody that don't understand what that role is?
Yeah, of course. So in each county, there's a Lord Lieutenant who is the King's personal representative in the county. And the Lord Lieutenant can't do everything, in representing the monarch. So he appoints, in the case of South Yorkshire, it's Dame Hilary Chapman.
Right.
So she appoints a Vice Lord Lieutenant and then Deputy Lieutenants. And I'm one of the deputies. So I deputise for Dame Hilary.
Okay.
In a role as the King's personal representative.
Right, okay.
It's an interesting role.
What does that mean? What does that entail? What do you have to do?
Anything and everything, I suppose. We go to citizenship ceremonies. So they're always nice, welcoming new citizens to the UK. We go to graduation ceremonies to represent, the King via Dame Hilary.
Yep.
We attend D-Day celebrations, VE Day celebrations, lighting the bonfire.
A lot of public facing.
Yeah, that's a lot of the stuff.
Yeah.
But we also undertake the assessments. So if somebody's nominated for a national honour, such as a MBE, OBE, and you don't nominate for an OBE, you nominate for a national honour.
Yeah.
Then if it's come through the community route, then it comes down to the deputy lieutenants or DLs to assess those nominations,
right? Okay,
and make recommendations. And the King's Award for Voluntary Service, King's Award for Enterprise, things like that
Yeah.
Deputy lieutenants go and do the legwork and do the assessments.
How did you receive the honour, and what does it mean to you personally to go into that role?
Yeah, it's officially it's not an honour.
Right, you know what I mean.
But it is. Of course, it's an honour.
Personal honour.
Yeah, of course it is.
Yeah.
I was approached by the Lord Lieutenant,
Right.
and I had no idea. And when I was asked, it took me all of 2 seconds to say, yeah, I'd be delighted, I'd be honoured, definitely. Who wouldn't be?
Yeah. What does it mean to you personally to be able to represent the sector as a deputy lieutenant?
Yeah, I think that's the important part, that you actually get to represent the sector in a way that I can talk about the sector quite passionately.
Yeah.
And getting to see some of the community organisations that I never knew existed. I went and did a King's Award for Voluntary Service Assessment on one recently, and they're only a small organisation, they're not registered charity or anything.
Right.
But the work they're doing is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And I really do wish them all the very best of luck in their assessment. In their continued assessment.
Yeah. What's the process, the basis outline of a process for people applying for these things or to nominate?
Yeah, so you can't apply for the King's Award.
Yeah.
You've got to be nominated.
Yeah.
So, it's somebody who would value the work of the organisation, who's not involved with the organisation. Mm-hmm. And I think you can apply for the enterprise one, but not the voluntary service one.
Yeah.
So they've got to have 2 letters of support. It's not particularly onerous.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if the organisation knows that you're nominating them.
Right, okay.
But then it goes through to the Cabinet Office. The Cabinet Office send it to the Lieutenancy. We get it to have a look at, and it gets divvied up, to different DLs, and we usually go in as a pair,
right, and
do the assessment.
Okay.
And in terms of the honours, of which there aren't enough in South Yorkshire, you could nominate somebody.
Right. Okay.
But that must be kept secret.
Right.
So the person who's being nominated shouldn't be told.
Got you.
But that can take 2 to 3 years for the whole process.
Right. Okay.
Because there's got to, it goes to the Honours and Appointments Secretariat. It then comes back to the Lieutenancy if that's the route it's going.
Right.
And then it's the DLs that will sort of in the background do all the checks and write the reports. But you don't nominate for a BEM, an MBE, an OBE, a CBE. All you do is say that this person is worthy of an honour. You write, you support it. You write your
like supportive evidence.
You put the evidence in. You write your nomination. You get 2 letters of support.
Right.
And submit it. And it really is easy. It really is.
We
get all the hard work.
Yeah, of course you do. Well, we will make sure. I know we already have in the past, but we'll make sure we distribute the information around that as well.
Yeah.
So we're slowly coming towards the end. So
I've penciled in a whole day for this, Clinton.
Well, I know that's not true because I know you've got a meeting with someone important after me. So, so from a personal side of things, then what's kept you going? We've been through a really tough time during COVID. We're now going through a lot of financial stress. What is it that keeps you going and working in this sector despite all those challenges?
Yeah, because I know I can make a difference, and as long as I can make a difference, I'll still be in the sector.
Yeah.
Once I stop being able to do that, I'll go.
Yeah.
I'll move into another sector. But as long as I can, even I think it's interesting because we're an older people's charity.
Yeah.
But yet we work with CB in Sheffield. We're sponsoring an award for young people who are doing values-driven business.
Right.
You know, we work with Project Choice and bring people with primarily autism into the organisation to host them for a period of weeks, to give them work experience. We work with Sheffield College to give students an insight into health and social care. We work with the medical school to provide year 3 med students with experience in the community.
Amazing.
We work with OT students from Sheffield Hallam. We've got, I think, 8 students from both uni of Sheffield and Sheffield Hallam at the moment who are psychology students within the organisation. So we feel whilst we're delivering our core message, our core mission and vision, we should still be reaching out. And it's like you said, collaboration. We're collaborating on different levels. Bring them in and actually show them what we do. Again, it's relationship building. So we're building relationships with people. But some of these students don't pick up a phone. They're texting all the time. So actually, when they're coming into our place and we say, you've got to make some connection calls. And
new skills.
But it's developing new skills. Of course it is. Of course it is.
Well, so, I mean, I think it's wonderful what you all do. And how, this might be a tricky question for you because I know you well. How would you personally stay resilient and maintain some sort of work-life balance, which is always a bit of a statement within this sector, work-life balance, but a lot of us are trying.
That's an awful question. To be honest, I think I'm a workaholic.
Right.
And I'm learning to say no more these days.
Very important word.
Yeah. But I don't expect it of my team. You know, I'd, just because I might work long hours, you know, or different hours, I don't expect them to do the same. It's just my nature. So how do I stay resilient? I'm not going to lie. You know, I used to scuba dive quite a lot.
Right.
And health reasons, I can't do that anymore.
Okay.
But that was my sort of go-to, I think. And these days it's more trying to get out and walk as much as I can with
my favourite thing,
my new dog. So I think that's
spending that time walking, thinking.
But I can say, well, I read. But the business books. Right. Because I'm
getting away from it.
It's not, is it? It really isn't. I'm reading something about EOS by Gino Wickman at the moment, and then I've got another book which is ready to go on business strategy.
My gosh, it's like your book collection is very different to mine.
I've got about 3,500 if you want to borrow any.
So our one of the things we like to do on the podcast is we like to get, which will be you today, our last guest to leave a question for the next one. And our last guest was Tariq Shah, OBE, who you know very well. And one of the things Tariq was talking about was about an inflection point in his life where he met somebody important and something turned around. Now, it wasn't for him about that point in your life. It was more about what had happened in your life or what had gone on to allow you to take advantage of that opportunity that came up, which I'm guessing would have been Derek.
Yeah,
in your early doors years.
To a degree. I think whilst he did play a big part, I think the inflection point was losing my job as a mechanic.
Right.
And being forced to go into something else. I don't think at that time, if I'd have, if I hadn't lost the job in the garage, I don't think I would have necessarily gone into charity work or bid writing or anything. That was something I did as a kid.
Yeah.
And I mean, I did a 48-hour pool marathon with some friends.
Good God.
Playing pool for 48 hours is a hell of a challenge.
It is, I can imagine.
But, it's like I was still doing things like that, but on a smaller scale. I wasn't a full-time fundraiser or charity worker, and I think it was the garage failure.
Right.
However that was caused, however that fire was caused.
Yeah.
Let's not perhaps expand on that. There's a lot of people with a lot of blame to carry, I think, on that.
Right. Okay.
But I think it was that sort of forced me hand and sent me down the community work path.
Yeah.
And logically, community work, fundraising, charity, it just all made sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's it. We are coming to the end, and I'm going to bring up the most important question shortly. But from me personally, I know we've had this conversation, but I like to put it out there and say thank you. You've helped me a lot, especially over the last 18, 24 months, with a lot going off in my own life and trying to understand the sector a lot, and just having been able to go for that chat, go for that meal, has been wonderful for me, and I know you do that for many other people. So thank you.
Thank you.
And keep doing what you do, and I love what your team do. We're here to support you as much as we possibly can. So it's going to lead me on to, which is our most important question at the Cherry Hub podcast, is we'd like to know your favourite cheese or your favourite meal.
I'm going to go for two here.
Okay, we don't mind that. Better
I'm
than
going to
none.
go for my favourite cheese.
Yep.
Which, without a doubt, is brie.
Right. Okay. Did not expect that.
What did you expect?
I always expect a cheddar or something,
Really?
from a working class man.
Yeah. See, it used to be a Lancashire crumbly,
Right.
to be honest.
Okay.
But I found a passion for brie.
Right. Particular palate for brie.
I just really enjoy it. I really do. And my favourite meal. Yeah, that's an interesting one, because actually it's changed. And last year we went away to Lanzarote.
Nice.
And went to an Italian restaurant. And there was something on the menu that I would never have in a million years. And it was salmon tagliatelle.
Right. Okay.
In a creamy white wine tomato-based sauce.
Okay.
Which sounds awful, really. But it was stunning.
Right.
And I said to my wife, I'm going to make that. And, she didn't believe me.
Was it as good?
It was. It
Oh,
was.
right.
So I've made it about 5 times since.
Impressive.
And every time it's just a really beautiful meal.
Yeah.
So I think it's salmon tagliatelle.
Nice touch, a bit different. And to round it off, what would your question be for our next guest?
Yeah, I think it's, given that Derek was somebody that inspired me, I think it's who or what inspired you and why.
Perfect. Well, a great way to end the podcast. Mark, thank you for your time. Keep doing what you're doing, and speak to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clynton. Thank you.